Awesome, thank you. So hi everybody. If you don't know me, my name is Amelia and I am the resident artist for Watercolor Snacks. I'm excited to be creating with you. And just a quick disclaimer, I have a new little studio mate. Her name's Gremlin because she's a gremlin. So if you hear any squeaking, crinkling, see a little creature zooming around in the background, that's her. So hopefully not too distracting, but just wanted to let you guys know that she is in the studio with us today. So I'm excited to get to work on some fun watercolor techniques with you tonight. So we can go ahead and switch over to our other camera and I can show you what we have with us today. So you may have seen in the mixed group this example that I made that has two bees and this honeycomb pattern. I also included a piece of honeycomb. Some of you may know if you have seen my live streams in the past or have just been following me over the last couple of years, but I'm also a beekeeper. So this is a chunk of honey from one of my beehives. And I'll probably just be chatting about some interesting bee facts as we're working on stuff this evening. But I also really wanted to show you this just to kind of show this really interesting way that the bees create the comb pattern. And actually what's really interesting that I think will be helpful as we are creating the honeycomb pattern is if you notice, a lot of honeycomb designs are created to look like a hexagon, but actually these are just circles. And because they are circles next to each other, this wax in between makes it look like it is a hexagon. It's actually not. So I always just thought that was really interesting because as I had looked at images of honeycomb, and if you look at it from kind of far away, it looks like a hexagon, but yeah, look at it up really close and you'll see that they're actually circles. And that's, the bees do a lot of stuff in these circles, which I'll probably talk about as we are going through the painting, just as, you know, I like to chat. But it's pretty awesome. And so knowing that the shape is this kind of round, these circles and not necessarily a hexagon pattern. If you look at a piece of bubble wrap, you'll notice it's doing something kind of similar. It's spaced kind of far apart, so it's not quite the same distance where it's creating that hexagon effect. These are a little more defined as circles, but I feel like it works well as a way to replicate that sort of honeycomb pattern. So let me go ahead and go over all the supplies just in case you need to gather some supplies up or if you just want to make sure you have everything you need. So this is just the example and I'm going to set that aside. But I'm using the materials that came in the spring watercolor snacks box. If you didn't get the spring box, not a big deal. You're of course welcome to continue following along with whatever watercolor supplies you have. Or if you want to just go ahead and use different supplies and maybe branch out from you know, what came in the box and you want to incorporate something else, you're of course welcome to do that as well. So you don't have to use the exact same things, but if you at least want to follow along and have similar items, then you can do that. So what came in the box this quarter is this really nice Fabriano hot press watercolor paper. I trimmed mine down to 5x7, so I have a smaller piece, but you can work any size that you want. I didn't want to use a big giant piece because this was a little bit experimental. So I thought, you know, it might be fun to just kind of work a little bit smaller. So I have a smaller piece of paper, but like I said, feel free to work as small or as large as you would like. I'm gonna set this aside as well and move this paper pad out of the way. All right, and then the other things that came in the box are these amazing My Mary Blue watercolor paints that are in the tubes. This is the set. These are so nice. I just really like the intensity of the pigment. What's cool about these is that they only use one pigment, so the color is really pure and intense, which is really nice. And these are also pretty big. They're not only pretty long, but they're also wide. This is a nice size tube, so these paints will last you a long time, which I think is really great. I have a watercolor palette. I always hate to wash out my paints when I have them already mixed, so it looks a little messy, but I'm just gonna squeeze more paint into the same palette, so I'll put more yellow into this palette here. But if you ever have a paint palette that has dried out paint, you don't have to wash it out. You can just reactivate it with water. So I like to do that because I'd like to get the most out of my paints. So that's why I still have paint in there, but just thought I'd mention that. I have the washi tape that came in the box, which I designed to have these on it. So hopefully you can see it. I'm having a hard time getting it to focus. But I drew these little bee characters on there. So if you would like to tape your paper down, you can certainly do that. You can use the washi tape to tape it down, or you can create an edge or a border if you would like. So that is also an option as well. And I think I might tape mine down. We're gonna use this today, the spray bottle. I like to use this just in general for reactivating paints in my palette or just keeping my paints wet in the palette, but we're gonna use this in our painting today. So if you haven't filled this up with water yet or you haven't used it yet, go ahead and have this handy as well. We got two brushes in the set. One's a petal brush and one's a round brush. So one is a little bigger and one's a little smaller for details. This Micron PN, which means plastic nib, but I'm sure you've heard me joke before. We call it the perfect nib because it's just a really nice all-around pen for drawing. I have two cups for water, so I can use one for mixing and one for cleaning my brush. And then I typically will have a paper towel. I just keep reusing the same paper towel, and I usually have that in my setup. So those are the things that came in the box or are pretty typical. But I want to show you a couple of other things that I'm going to be using that are a little less typical, but will give you some cool effects. Now, if you don't have these things, that's perfectly fine. You can always just kind of paint in the shapes to kind of get the same effect, or you can just use the brushes to get the splatter effect. But I always have an old toothbrush on hand in my toolkit because I like to use it for splattering. So you can dip it in a little bit of paint and then get a really nice splatter effect. So I'm going to use that. That's actually how I got the effect of this example here. So I have that handy. And then this is the plastic from the this most recent WatercolorSnacks box. I actually just because you know it has that smooth plastic on top, I cut the zipper off, and then I had to remove this bubble wrap from the inside. So now I have some nice smooth pieces of plastic, which I'll probably find something crafty to do with those too. But this is a fun way to use the bubble wrap that came in the box. I just cut off a small piece, but you can use as big of a piece of bubble wrap as you want, or as small, excuse me, as small as a piece as you want. But it's nice now you have this nice big sheet of bubble wrap that you can do whatever you want with. If you want to do other crafty things, or if you need a new piece, you've got plenty. But I just have this little piece that I showed you earlier. Resist the urge to pop it because you need it to be full of air. I really want to pop the bubbles, but I'll do that later. And then I just have a couple little scrap pieces of paper. I always keep those on hand for testing colors, mixing colors. We're not going to be mixing a lot of colors, but it's just handy to have in case you want to make sure it looks like what you want. So that's everything that I have. Don't think I forgot anything, but if I do, I'll let you know what else to add. So I think I am gonna go ahead and tape down my edges and make sure I don't tape it down too far. You don't always have to tape down your watercolor paper, but it can be helpful because, as I'm sure you've experienced with watercolor paper before, when your paper gets wet, it will start to buckle, and then like sort of how this dried, it starts to have a little bit of a curve to it. There's simple ways to fix that, which I can share in the mix group, but one way you can do that is to use your spray bottle and spray the back of your paper and then put it under something heavy like a textbook or a heavy thick book. Don't get it super duper wet because you don't want it to soak through your paper, but by re-wetting the fibers, it will start to take a flat shape. So you could do that. You can actually iron your paper if you use a really low setting on your iron and put a washcloth in between the iron and the paper. So you don't want to touch the paper directly with your iron. But I've flattened paper out that way as well. Or you could also just place it under a heavy book for a couple of weeks. Takes longer if you don't add water or anything, but it will eventually start to flatten out. So just some ideas, but I'll share in the mixed group ways to flatten out your paper. And this is gonna, when I get it wet, it's gonna swell, so it will kind of start to have a little bit of a curve, but this will kind of keep it from wiggling away. Oh, I did forget one thing, and I'm not gonna bring it to the demonstration today just because of the noise, but if you have a hairdryer or a heat gun, that can be helpful for speeding up the process for the two or for between the layers, since we're going to be using a good amount of water for this project. So if you want to keep working on it but it's still wet and you don't want to disturb the layer that's still drying, you can use a hairdryer. Or if you don't have a hairdryer, you have a heat gun, you can use a heat gun also. Just make sure you hold it at a distance from your paper. I prefer to use a hairdryer because I worry that I'm gonna set my paper on fire with the heat gun. So I'm just nervous about it, but it does work. You just have to be a little more careful. Okay. So to start with, I'm using my petal brush because that's the bigger size brush. If you have one that's even bigger, that's also great. But if this is the biggest one you have, that works too. And you can, I'm gonna try something a little different. Because I was going for a certain effect when I tested this out. Oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited. I'm gonna put some more paint on my palette. I would hope if I had paint to do a painting. I don't want to use this one. I grabbed the wrong one. I'm gonna grab the yellow one. So I am using the cadmium yellow deep here. And I'm gonna put a little bit of that into my palette. So I want to try something different. Because what I did when I made this was I put a wash of water on and then added a wash of color. But I want to see what happens when I add some paint first and then use the spray bottle. So I'm going to be a little experimental. So if you want to do a big wash, go ahead and use a bigger brush. Or if you want to use either the small or big brush for this, both will work. I don't know if anybody else is like this when they're creating, where you start to have one idea and you're like, oh wait, I think I want to try something else. Sometimes that happens to me. Or I'll have a plan and then I kind of abandon that plan altogether.
Story of my life, Amelia.
Yeah.
We have a question that just popped up in the chat.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Tips for someone that doesn't happen to have a spray bottle. What do you suggest?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question. So if you don't have a spray bottle, another thing you could do is if you want to take a brush with some water and try splattering, that could be a way to get water moving across the paper in a way that is getting some motion to it. It won't be as much water coming out because the water's being drawn up through the tube and out the little spritzer at the top nozzle. I don't know what it's I don't know what it's called. So this is gonna put more water out. But if you take just your brush with some water and then maybe or something like that, that could kind of help get that sort of splatter effect. Um, it just will be more subtle. So you might have to do it more. So I hope that helps. But I think this is a really experimental project. So try things out and just see what happens. The cool thing is that everyone will get a different outcome. So I think that's a cool thing. But I'm just taking some paint and putting some dots down on my paper. And you can have some areas that have more paint and some areas that have less. But I just want to see what happens when I put some paint on the paper and then use the spray bottle to spread it out. I'm going to try to cover a somewhat even amount of the paper, but I don't want it to be too concentrated. Okay, so now here's the moment of truth. Ooh, that's pretty cool. I don't want to get it too wet. Right. That looks pretty cool. So, don't want, like I said, I don't want it to be too wet. There's something going on outside. I don't know if you can hear it, but helicopter outside. Okay. So I think something that I want to try with this is using layers and using different textured materials to create effects in the paint. So I'm going to grab a paper towel and just kind of lay that on top. Part of it is to like kind of soak up some of that extra water, but it's also to create a texture on the paper with the paint. So it does lighten it up a little bit. I'm kind of spreading out the color to get a little bit of a speckle effect. I'm just dabbing it a little bit. And I'm gonna bring my camera down just so you can see. Oh, sorry, I'm a little too wild there. Bring that a little closer. Oh, sorry. Oh no, I taped my paper down too low. I'm gonna move that up. So you might need to let it dry just a touch.
I was actually just gonna ask, like, where did you, like, what is your paper taped on? Because I feel like sometimes I tape it on like the back, the back of a pad of paper,
Oh,
or
okay.
I have a couple like cutting boards so that it's movable like that. It's very risky to just put it right down on the table.
Yeah, that's a really good idea to use a cutting board so you can move it around. I've used a clipboard before because I have one around here. I've used like you said, the back of a sketchbook or something like that. Yeah, I just taped it right onto my table today. But yeah, that's a good suggestion for people who might want to be able to move their paper around and rotate it. You can tape it down to something you can pick up and move as well. So yeah, good suggestion. Okay. So I'm going to now grab my toothbrush and I want to add some more speckles just to get a different kind of texture effect. So I'm gonna just dab my toothbrush into my well of paint, get a little extra off, and then Just gonna flick some paint in there. And right now I'm just using one color, but I think I'm gonna incorporate a variety of colors. So maybe some brown and maybe add in a little bit of red too. But I am going to try the spray bottle again. And actually, something that might be cool. Maybe I should have taped this on to something I could move around because now I want to move my paper around. I'm gonna transfer this to the back of my paper pad, I think. All about adaptability. And I feel like when you get experimental with art, sometimes you just have to kind of play around and see what happens. So that's how you make discoveries, even when things don't always work out. Okay. So now I've used my splatter effect and my spray bottle, and now I'm gonna kind of tilt and let the paint run in different directions. Just to get some coverage that is a little less controlled. Okay, and now while this is wet, I'm going to mix up some more of this brown color. So I'm going to show you some color mixing magic that you may have seen if you tuned in last week, but if not, you'll see it again. So I'm taking some of the quinacridone lake, that's this sort of magenta color. And I'm going to take a little of this cadmium yellow. And there's already some of the mixed in some of the blue a little bit to make the brown, but you can see it's creating more of an orangey red color. And it doesn't look pink, which I think is what you might expect from mixing this magenta in, but when you mix it with the yellow, it creates a reddish color, like a more of a crimson red. And then if you include, and I'm not going to mix it in just yet because I like this dark rust red color, but if you add a tiny bit of the, this is the, I always forget the names, even though I look at them every day. It's the, this is the ultramarine deep. So if you mix a tiny bit of this with this orange red color you just created, it's gonna make it more brown. So that's how you make it a little darker. But I want to take my toothbrush, and you don't want it to be too watery. So if you're getting rid of some of the color in between colors, just make sure that you dry off some of the excess water in between. But I'm gonna take some of that onto my brush, and since my paper is still pretty wet, I'm gonna splatter in some of this brown. Now, dab up some of the areas where it's a little more watery. Yeah, I'm just kind of going through and with my paper towel, dabbing up to lift up some areas. Let's skip this over. I'm gonna lift up some areas. But I don't want to do that to all the parts of it because I do want some parts that are gonna look a little more dark so that there's some variety there. But what I'm going for is just to create a really interesting texture using the watercolors. And this is going to be kind of set into the background. So like in this example, this is really all about texture. So we're not really worried so much about making things look realistic. It's more sort of appreciating the nature of watercolors and the different effects that you can get, and just really playing into the ability to make really cool textures, and let the water kind of control what the outcome is like. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I mean, there's a little bit of control happening where you go in and start to lighten up some areas. But overall, it's a little unpredictable and you can't really tell what it's going to look like, and everyone's will look really different at the end, which I think is very fun. All right. So I think I'm gonna give it another spritz. And then I'm gonna try adding some areas with bigger, I'm just kind of dabbing in some color. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. I just kind of want to add some color in. I'm using that same reddish brown color. It's kind of add some speckles. And I'm kind of going in the corners, but I might also just sort of balance out a little bit in the middle also. And I'm using the petal brush. Again, I'm just kind of dabbing in some color. I don't want it to be too balanced looking because I'm going for something that looks like it could be organic, like an organic sort of shape. And then just going back in with the spray bottle again, just to get a little more water on there. And you can go in and add, if you want to add more yellow, you can do that. And it's okay if you still have some of the white space left too. It doesn't all have to be 100% filled in. And add a little more of the magenta color. And just create a little more of a bright red. So the effect that I'm creating by dabbing the wet paint into wet areas of the paper is called a bloom effect. So you can see how the color starts to bloom out and spread out because the paper is wet. So the pigment is traveling across the paper. Expanding. Okay. And then I want to let this sit for a little bit, and I'm gonna just show you some techniques for practicing drawing some bees before we jump into drawing them on the paper, on the painting itself. But before I do that, I think I'm just gonna go in with, this is a bit of a risk, but I think it's gonna pay off. Just a tiny bit of the Payne's gray, not a lot. But I noticed in the example that I made that there's like a really strong contrast between the dark bees and the light background. So I want to balance out that contrast a little bit and just add a teeny little bit of darker color sprinkled in there too. So I have a little bit of watered down Payne's gray on my toothbrush, and I'm just gonna slowly and gently add a little bit of a dark color, just sprinkled in, because I want to have a balance of light and dark on there. Because this dark pen line is really going to stand out against the light background. And I just feel like it needed a little something on there. So my paper's pretty saturated and I like how it looks so far. I think this looks pretty cool. So I want to let it dry a little. So while that's drying, I want to show you how to draw the bee. It's pretty simple. It's just using simple shapes. And I thought it might be a good chance to practice drawing them on a separate piece of paper so that you can, feel confident when you're drawing it on your painting. So I'm gonna zoom in a little closer onto this little scrap paper and just move a couple of things out of the way. For your help, kitten. Can stop knocking over boxes. Okay. So, the bees that I drew on this example, I started out just with some really simple shapes. So, just a circle is the first shape I started with, and then filled that in. And then another circle right next to it. And this is supposed to be like the bee's eyes. And then I just connected it with a little sort of half circle and then connected the top. And that is the bee's head shape. And then from where the circles meet, put two antennas. And you can add a little circle at the end of those two, or a little dot if you want. So that's the head. And then it's kind of a bean shape. So you draw a curved line that goes against the head. And you're kind of drawing a bean like that. And then you just fill it in. That. And then you're going to leave a little space. And you're going to draw another curved line. That's where one of the stripes is going to go. Let's make it a little thicker and fill it in like that. And then you'll do that again underneath of there. And then one more in the shape of a triangle. And then you'll just connect all those lines. And that's the body. And then from the center, I think this looks pretty close to what I drew. It looks a little different. It's like, wait, what did I draw? So then from where the head meets the body, you're gonna give it some little arms. And then a little further down, you'll give it two legs. Like that. And then the last thing to add are the wings. And it's okay if it overlaps. Like that. And that's your bee. So pretty easy, but we can practice it again since it's still drying. And I think my bee looks a little chubby, so I'm gonna try it again. So we'll draw the two eyes. and the little head, that. And then I'm actually gonna leave a little more space this time. Okay. A little more. Fill that in. And then if you want, if you didn't like drawing the stripes in like that, you could just complete complete the body and then fill in the stripes from there. So more than one way to do it. But we want to get this kind of torpedo shape almost. And then, oh yeah, add the antennas, arms, and the legs, and the wings. So not too bad. And you know, it's pretty easy to draw and it definitely looks like a bee. So you know, you can draw as many of these bees as you like. You can draw one or two, you could draw many bees, you could fill the whole page with bees, create a whole bee pattern. But now you kind of have a technique and approach for drawing the bees. So hopefully it doesn't feel too intimidating if you haven't drawn bees before. So we'll set that aside. And I still have some parts of my paper that aren't totally dry, but that's okay. Let me bring this back and I'll zoom back out a little bit. Like, why isn't this fitting in the frame? Oh yeah, because I zoomed in. All right. So now what I want to do is add a light wash of color. So I'm going to mix up more brown. So I'm going to add yellow. I'm going to add some of this quinacridone lake or magenta. All right. And then this time I will mix up brown by adding in just a little bit of blue. So the reason that these three colors and why I picked them to mix up brown is because these are three primary colors, or at least close to the primary colors that we see on the color wheel, with the sort of magenta as our red, and then we've got yellow and blue. And when you mix all three primary colors together, you get brown. So that's how we get that color, because if you mix a color with its complement on the color wheel, so for example, orange and blue, well, you mix orange with red and yellow. So essentially, by mixing together all three of the primaries, you're also mixing together all of the complementary color combinations. So, you know, you get that sort of brown color from your mixture. All right. So again, my paper is not totally dry, but I think we're at an okay stage to add our next layer of color. So two options. You can either take your brush, your petal brush, which is the bigger one, and take that and apply a wash of clean water across the surface of your paper. Or you can use your spray bottle again and get the surface of your paper damp. So more than one way to do it. I'm gonna go with the spray method just because I think that's gonna be a little quicker and cover more area. I'm going to take a very thin wash of brown and just start to lay in a layer of brown. Ooh, that came out a little darker than I meant for it to. It's okay. I'm gonna do, this is a method for creating a wash. So if you are able to tilt your paper, just drag your brush down your paper like this. And there's a bead of paint. I'm just kind of pulling down across my paper.
Hey, Amelia,
Yeah.
while you do this, I just want to let you know that we are halfway through class.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And this looks so cool. This is a technique I've literally never used before.
Oh, thanks.
This is cool.
Yeah, I love getting experimental with adding layers and effects and textures. So I'm glad you think it's cool. Okay. So I'm gonna add just a little more. I'm actually gonna flip it around and do it the other way this time. Okay. So that feels pretty good. So the reason why I'm working this way is one, I wanted to create a layer that's going to come up through this wash we just put on. And then two, I put a wash down because now is when we're going to try using the bubble wrap. So I wanted to get a light enough wash of color down so that when I put my bubble wrap on, it's going to start to lift a little bit. So you can kind of put it on any way you want. This is where it's going to require a little patience. And if you have a hair dryer or a heat gun, this is a good time where you could use it. Just be careful because if you blow any wind on your bubble wrap, it will blow off your paper. I know that because I did that a couple of times. So I was like, okay, I guess I just have to be patient. So I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. One is to sort of use the bubble wrap to lift. That didn't really work. I think it's too wet. This is experimental. So we're trying things out and seeing if they work, and if they don't, try something else. So, because what I did with my example piece is I actually painted the bubble wrap and then put it on the paper, but I think everything was still too wet when I tried that. So let's try something else because my first plan didn't work out the way I meant for it to, but that's okay. Let's try doing the painting the bubble wrap method. I was thinking that what would happen was when the paint is on the paper, when I put the bubble wrap on, as it dried, when I pulled it off, the parts that were touching the paper, the bubble wrap parts, would stay or would get lighter, and then the parts around it would get darker. But I think maybe it didn't work out the way it did in my mind. So, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's a big part of experimenting and using non-traditional materials is just seeing what happens and trying things out, and it doesn't always work. So, but this did work for me last time. I'm just gonna try not to use as much paint and maybe try to spread it out more evenly, as I'm just painting the bubble wrap itself with using dark brown. I might actually add a little, might make it a little darker. I just threw a little Payne's gray in there. Let's just see what happens. if you're someone who's new to watercolor and maybe you've been a little nervous to start because you don't want to mess up, I hope that this is inspiring you to just try weird things and see what happens. Because if it doesn't work out, that's okay. You learned what does and doesn't work. And that's a big part of art making is experimentation. So, you know, that's how you learn is by figuring out what doesn't work. That's just as valuable as what does work. So I learned this way works. I learned the other way didn't work for me this time, but maybe I'll try something different in the future. For now, I'm just gonna take my painted bubble wrap and I'm just gonna kind of lay it down on my surface. You can already tell that this is working better. And really gently kind of just tapping it into place. I try not to put too much watercolor on, but in some areas where the paint beat it up a little bit more, it's gonna have a little more of a little more coverage. It's not gonna look as perfectly circular, but that's okay. Now, you can either kind of let this dry a little more, which I would recommend that you try. But I just want to see what it looks like. Oh, that turned out way cooler than the last time I did it. The experimentation worked. And I think this is kind of cool. So it was still a little wet over here, but I actually really like how it smeared. Oh, that turned out cool. How exciting. All right, let's try again and maybe some other spots. All right, so I'm just gonna do the same thing. Just trying to evenly spread out the paint on my bubble wrap. Yeah, something that I like to keep in mind with art is that there's no limit to how many times you can try something. And if it doesn't work out, well, that's okay. You just try something, you just make more art. There's no limit to how many times you can make art or create or anything like that. So there shouldn't be pressure to get it perfect because you have a billion million chances to do something that you feel like looks better or you're happier with. So, and then the more you make stuff, the better you get just because you're practicing it. So, you know, it's good to keep going. Okay. I'm using it kind of like a stamp a little bit. Ooh, cool. I've got a little on this side. But not really going for perfectly even either. This is just kind of however it comes out is how it comes out. It needs a little more. Although I think it's okay if it's not totally covering the whole paper, but I do want to add a little more in that corner. That looks pretty cool. I do want to let it dry a little bit. So in the meantime, while this one is drying, I think I'm going to come back to this and add a little bit more to it because I think it could be interesting to maybe go a little bolder and maybe add even more layers to this. So I'm just going to keep using my bubble wrap technique to add more to this piece. And again, don't want it to be too watery, but what I might do, well, let's see what happens with a paper that's totally dry And then maybe we can add some water to it and see what happens then. I would be curious if anyone tries this and wants to cut their bubble wrap into maybe a certain kind of shape. That could be cool. So as you're laying your bubble wrap down, maybe you don't have these really perfectly straight edges. Maybe you cut it into like a flower shape or an abstract organic type of shape. Something like that would be interesting to see what that looks like. So bees pretty much make things, it's not always perfect because you can see how in this piece of, this is called burr comb, which just means it's comb that they build in empty spaces in their hive. We can see like they build it in interesting shapes. Often when we see it, it's in a perfect line because beekeepers use frames that the bees build on, and it keeps everything nice and organized. But if they don't have any kind of structure, they will build into really interesting shapes, and they typically will build them round. So if your honeycomb shape isn't perfectly uniform or anything like that, even though the circles themselves are spaced almost exactly apart, um, if your artwork isn't, that's okay. Oh, that's pretty cool. Oh, I kind of like how this has a really light layer behind and then a darker layer on top. That could be something cool to do too. That maybe if you don't have just one layer like I did in the one that we're working on now, um, you could add a lighter layer and then build up darker layers on top of that. I think that would look really cool. Yeah, so I said I would talk a little bit about the honeycomb and the different things that bees do in the comb. So they, as I'm sure everyone knows, they store their honey in there. They also raise their babies in the little cells. So there will be a baby bee that lives in each of the cells. And then when they become an adult, there's a little cap of wax on top that protects them. And then when they're ready to come out and start working in the hive, they chew through the wax. And it's really cute. You can see the little bee. It's like munching through the wax. It's really cute to see them emerge. But they look just like a full-grown bee by the time they come out. And that's always cool to see. And they also will make something called bee bread, which sounds really cute, but it's actually not as cute as it sounds. It's just pollen and I think it's pollen and something else mixed together. But what's really cool is that sometimes in the summer, they'll actually be filled with different colored pollens. So there's different colored flowers. So there sometimes is red and green and yellow, sometimes even like a bluish color, although it usually turns out green because the pollen is already yellow. But inside of these little cells, there will sometimes just be different colors. And when you hold it up to the light, it shines through. It's almost like stained glass. It's really pretty, and really cool to see. So that's another thing they do. They store pollen in there. So honey, pollen, their little babies are in there. Um, all kinds of really cool things. So it's just really fun to go in and observe. And now that I've mentioned that sometimes these have different colored pieces of pollen inside, it might be fun is to go in and add some color inside some of these. And I'm just gonna kind of put it in there randomly. But yeah, and something that's cool. So the next time you're at a farmer's market or somewhere where your local beekeeper might be selling honey, if you ever see honey that is sold as different types of honey, usually what that means throughout the season, bees will go and harvest from different types of plants as they are in bloom. So you've probably seen clover honey, but sometimes you'll see, if a bee is near like a lavender field or something, it'll be lavender honey. Or, depending on around where I live, we have a lot of like magnolia trees, dogwoods. We have, oh, I can't think of the name. It's, I think, black locust trees. Um, so we have all kinds of different trees around here. So we'll get honey that tastes different at the beginning and end of the season. So the beginning of the season, it's usually, oh, I hope I'm not getting this backwards, but I think it's usually darker honey, closer to the beginning of the season, and then by autumn, I think it's lighter, but I might have that backwards. Maybe it's lighter in the beginning of the season and darker closer to autumn. But it's pretty cool. So if you see honey that you see different levels of lightness and darkness, that's because the bees are pulling in nectar from whatever is in season and bloom around them, which I think is very cool. But they're pretty awesome little creatures. I've really enjoyed learning about them over the last couple years. I started beekeeping in 2018, so I've been beekeeping for a while. And I started out by just helping. I have a beekeeping mentor, so I just helped him. And then a couple years ago, I found some bees. They do something called swarming, and if they're swarming, you can catch them. So I did that, and I've had them, knock on wood, the same bees for several years. So they've been in really good shape. So I think this is really pretty with the little spots of color. So I think I'll add this to my other version too. But now that that one is drying a little more, I think it feels ready to add some little bees. So I'm just gonna go through and draw some bees. I'm just gonna kind of place them randomly on my piece. But if you want to plan out, like maybe your bees are marching across, you could do that. You could have them all perfectly spaced out. Or they could be random, like what I'm gonna do. So, and you can make them different sizes. So in a beehive, you'll have drone bees. Those are the male bees, and they're really big, but they don't have any stingers. They just go out and forage. Well, actually, they don't go out and forage. Sometimes they do, but there are forager bees. Those are female bees. Most of the bees in a beehive are female. So you've got forager bees. They go out and collect nectar and pollen and tree sap. And then we've got nurse bees. They help take care of the baby bees. You've got worker bees. They're the ones who work on making the honey when it comes into the hive. So, and then of course there's the queen. There's only one queen. And she's in charge of having all the babies. So the queen is really important. And if a hive doesn't have a queen, then they'll make a new one. And that's like a really big cell. It looks like a peanut, and it'll be about this big. and there will be a really big giant baby, and it's a giant baby bee, and that becomes the queen because her body is bigger than all the other bees because she has baby bees, and she also uses her body to measure these cells. Um, and can determine whether or not a bee will be male or female based on how big the cell is that she lays the egg in. And and it also has to do with how much of the wax is built out on top. But she can kind of control the population of the bees. So she doesn't necessarily tell them what to do, but the bees do take care of the queen, and they need to have a queen in the hive to function because without her, they're like, well, what are we doing here? We don't have anything to work on. Let's go find something to do. So it's pretty interesting. And I feel like I'm learning all the time. Always learning something new. That was pretty cool. I think my favorite thing that they do though is this really cute thing where they make like a pipping sound. They'll do like it's like sounds like they have a tiny little horn and they're like doo, doo. It's really funny. And they do that as a signal to the other bees. I think it's when they don't have a queen they do that. It's really funny.
Hey, Amelia, just jumping in here.
Yeah.
Thank you for the immense amount of fun facts
Oh
about.
yes. You're welcome.
It almost felt like that scene in Forrest Gump where his buddy in the army is like talking about all different uses for shrimp. And I'm
Yes.
like, here we go, all the different types of bees.
Yes.
Who knew?
Yes, it's true. There's a lot of different kinds of bees in there.
I love that. You have about like 22 minutes left.
Great. Sounds good. That should give us plenty of time to draw our bees, then add some color, and then we can see what everybody's working on. I think I'm actually missing maybe part of the bee in this drawing, but I think that's okay. We can tell it's a bee. We know they're bees. Close enough. There should actually probably be I guess there's another part here in the middle, like that. See how that looks. If it looks weird. Looks a little weird. I wouldn't do that again. I'm sure you'll find the more that you start drawing these bees, the faster you'll get at drawing them. We've had a lot of rain where I live. I'm sure a lot of other people, at least on the East Coast, have probably also gotten a lot of rain, which has been awesome for the plants. But that means I haven't been able to go check on my bees because I can't look at them and open up their hive in the rain. But I do think they're very happy because of all the rain, we have tons of flowers and all the plants are just going wild and blooming and we have flowers and everything in my garden is really big. Um, so that's been fun, and inspiring, especially for the full bloom box. Just thinking about, all the flowers and plants that are out there that are fun to observe, and hopefully you're feeling inspired with the palette of paints that we have. And when you go outside, maybe you're out there thinking about painting some of the flowers. But you could try some of these really loose watercolor techniques for painting really lush foliage or areas with flowers, because if you think about kind of like an impressionist approach to painting where not everything is super defined, you can just, sprinkle in the color around, and, when people look at it, just based on the colors, people will interpret, uh, your painting as being maybe a garden or a scene with a lot of flowers. But I really like this loose textural um, approach to creating um, a painting. As much as I like to draw things that are um, realistic, I also just really like enjoying putting paint on paper and, you know, putting color on, and just the experience of making art. So hopefully you're getting a chance to do that tonight too. I'm gonna try to make this one the queen. I'm trying to draw it a little bigger. Now the queen only flies once, um, when she's first born. And then after that, she just stays in the hive for the rest of the time because she's busy with, tending to her uh, bees and within the hive, and having the babies and all that stuff. So you won't ever see a queen out flying out in nature. The most of the time, you're gonna see forager bees. They don't always have stingers. Only female bees have stingers. So if you see a really big honeybee, it might be a male. It might be a male forager. So they don't always sting, um, which is interesting. But typically the only time you're gonna get stung is if you accidentally squish one just out by some flowers. But unless you're near their hive and they're feeling threatened, when you encounter a honeybee that's just out in a flower, it's not going to try to sting you because it doesn't really have a reason to. Um, so the only time that you really have to kind of be cautious is if you're near their hive, because they're like, "Hey, are you a bear?" That's why beekeepers wear white or light colored suits, because they're more likely to think you're a predator if you're wearing dark colors. This did still sting me anyway, but it's okay. I'm used to it. Okay. I think this is a good number of bees. I think it's an interesting design. They're all kind of facing different ways, and then we've got our queen right there in that spot. So I'm going to add a couple little spots with color um, in some of these cells. And just like with the bees, I'm just kind of moving them or placing them around in random spots, just in places I think will look interesting in terms of design to add variety and spread out some of the designs. I'm just gonna fill in also this part that's mirrored a lot and just kind of go in and define some of those circles again. Go ahead and add a little yellow. If you ever have a spot that comes out a little too dark, just take a paper towel and dab it up. It happens to me sometimes. I'm like, oops, I thought that was going to be lighter. So if that happens, paper towel will come to the rescue. Okay. I think this is in a pretty good place. Um, I know it's no, I think this might be a good time to maybe if people wanted to share, this might be a good time to do that too.
Anybody feel like sharing their beehive? Feel free to raise your hand virtually or physically, and I will spotlight you. I'm reading in the comments. They sleep in my hollyhocks.
Oh, that's so
I'm guessing,
cute.
is that a flower?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, that's okay. I saw Laurelyn just watched. That's fine too.
Sometimes it's just nice to watch. It's very relaxing.
Yeah, I think so too. I often will just jump on a live stream just to watch or kind of have it on in the background.
Totally.
And I'm just going in now and just defining some of these circles a little bit. Um, yeah, I've heard that bees will sometimes fall asleep in flowers, and I think that's just the cutest thing. I've seen some
Aw.
pictures. I'm like, oh, that's adorable. A cute bug. Confiscate something from my studio assistant.
From Gremlin.
Yes, this is why I named her Gremlin. She found a pair of earrings that were sitting somewhere. I had
You
to
know,
take.
she's still new.
Yes.
Getting to understand the space. Let's give her
Yeah.
a chance.
Yes. She's still learning. Just don't want her to eat them.
Huh.
Like, I don't know if I trust you not to eat that yet. Yeah, and so I'm kind of going in and defining these circles where it blurred out a little more, but I think I'm gonna go through and do just some more where maybe I want it to stand out a little more. So that's something you guys could do too. And I'm using the fine round brush for that. Maybe I'll add a couple little just speckles just for fun. I think overall this was a pretty fun piece to work on. I feel like even though some of it I was like, I'm just gonna try it out and see what happens. I'm pretty happy with the results overall. I think it's a pretty unique and interesting way to create some texture and um just get some interesting effects. So I hope that other people had a similar experience where it's kind of like, well, we'll just see what happens, and hopefully you like the outcome of what you got with your piece too.
All right, I see Alicia wants to share, so I am going
Yay.
to spotlight.
Oh, great.
And feel free to turn off your, turn on your sound so we can hear you.
So, see, I don't know if it's gonna drip, but it's kind of what I'm working on.
That looks so cool. Oh my gosh. I love that.
Thanks. I really struggled with the bees.
Oh, but they turned out so good. They're really cute. It looks like you added some more detail in them too.
I couldn't help it. I on Inktober I went crazy with the whole like realistic ant thing. So I went in back into my brain archives for legs.
I love that. Oh my gosh, it turned out so nice. And the textures are really pretty too.
Thanks. I only had a deflated, really tiny thing, and I went and grabbed it
Oh,
out of my closet.
I think it worked well. And I think what's cool about yours is probably because there wasn't air in it, it left more like circle marks, which I actually really like how that came out compared to mine that is just the C shape. Maybe it would look better if I had popped them. Because I really like how that came out.
Yeah, well, I to add a little bit of a definition, I grabbed out one of my micron pens that's more of a sepia color.
Oh,
I felt
cool.
it kind of matches it, so I broke away from the black briefly because I really wanted to highlight some of them, but I'm like, oh, let me grab out the sepia.
Yeah. Oh, I think that was a brilliant idea because that still adds some contrast but isn't as dark as the black, so it still pops, but it's not competing. So I think that's really cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, nice job. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really
Thank
enjoyed.
you.
You're welcome.
Thanks
Oh,
for
cool.
sharing. Anybody else want to share what they've created? No pressure. All right, Amelia, we've got like 6 minutes left. So if you have time, I would love a washi tape peel from this. And I have to say, the bees on the washi tape is very distracting.
Yes. Yeah, they're like chilling out, they're just when I was drawing it, I was like, okay, there's two bees that are in love because they're sharing a little azalea and they're both drinking out of it with straws. There's one bee that's just sleeping on the job, but you know, working hard, so they're taking a break. And then I drew the queen bee, and she is just hanging out with her assistant. So there's a little tiny bee. So that's the story behind the bees. I was creating little characters and stories, but yeah, I think this is ready to peel. So let's just see. I have to try not to rip my paper. I have to keep this out of reach of a certain kitten because I know that she would love to play with this.
It's perfect.
Yeah, it turned out really nicely. Sometimes when I do stuff with a lot of water and paint, it gets a little messy around the corners, but it turned out really clean. Yeah. So this is fun. Like, I think at this size too, if you wanted to send this as a postcard, this is postcard sized. So you could make, you know, if you wanted to make more than one of these, you could. And then um you could seal it, which I think it was Laurelyn told us about that great sealer that you can put over watercolor. So you could do something like that and send this off in the mail to somebody. You could go in with colored pencil and add some more details if you wanted. So there's all kinds of fun things you could do um, with this design. So hopefully it's something fun and creative that you guys find. I'm gonna sign my painting in the corner too, so don't forget to sign your artwork as well. Oh, Alicia, I saw your comment that you haven't touched watercolor since you were a kid and feared them. I hope that this kind of broke you out of some of that fear, just knowing that there's so much that you can do with watercolors, and sometimes letting them be unpredictable can be really freeing because it allows you to you know, just allow them to do their thing, and it's okay if it's not perfect. So yeah. And bye, Laurelyn. See that you're heading out too.
Love it. It came out so good. Can we get a view of the example one you made and this one? See how different they are?
Yeah, yeah. Where am I going? Okay.
Ooh,
Yeah.
which one do you like better?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, which one do you like better?
Oh, I think I'm happier with this one. Just because I like that it has more bees on it, and but I actually do think this turned out really cool too. So it's hard to pick. I like them both for different reasons, but yeah. And it was fun. The first time I was just kind of seeing if the bubble wrap would even work. I think going back in and adding more layers made a big difference and made it more interesting. And then with this one, I kind of knew a little more how the bubble wrap would react. So I took a different approach with it. Although I do kind of like that this has the lighter layer behind it. So yeah, but you know, like I said, every time it's going to come out a little different, which is nice because, you know, each one is unique. It's its own thing. So, yeah.
I love that. With this technique, everything is different. Like it will never come out the same twice. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. Which is really cool. And again, is kind of freeing because you don't have to worry about making it perfect because it's going to come out how it's going to come out.
Totally. Awesome. All right. Well, we have like a minute left.
Mhm.
Anybody else last minute you want to share? Um, if not, highly recommend you show us what you're making on the ArtSnacks mix group. And yeah, Amelia's on there, so she'll see it, she'll comment. Let's make everybody jealous.
Yeah.
Even though the recording will be up next week, so it's not too bad. Not missing much.
Yeah.
But I think we have one or two more live streams for this one,
I
for
think the
this
next,
box.
yeah, the next one's gonna be in July, July 12th.
Yeah. So in the meantime, if you're looking for inspiration, check back into the mix group or even on our YouTube page. I always recommend this to people if they're just like lost or like not inspired. We have a huge back catalog of just watercolor live streams and replays. So if you're looking for something fun, even if you don't have the same color palette or it's from a different box, we have plenty of lessons to keep you busy and motivated in the watercolor world. So yeah, I always send people to our YouTube page for extra projects or inspiration in the meantime between lives. So
Yeah, definitely.
awesome. All right. Well, Amelia, thank you so much for your time tonight. Can we get a view of Gremlin real quick if
Oh,
she's
yeah.
around?
Here she
We
is.
got her last week, so I feel like she has to make a cameo now.
She's already a library cat. She's laying on my stack of library books. Here she
There she
is.
is. Hello.
She's
How
like,
sweet.
"What's happening?" Yeah. Even though she was a little rowdy, she's been very sweet. She's a very good cat. So,
Amazing.
mhm.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us live. We'll catch you on Mix really soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Have a good
Appreciate.
weekend.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.